This presentation will look at cognitive load theory and how it can be applied to psychology teaching. The main reference here is Sweller 1988, and you'll see that the reference is in the footer on all of the slides so that you can read further on this if you so wish. So cognitive load theory is based on the principles of the working memory model. The idea that the capacity of working memory or short-term memory is limited. So therefore we've got to be really careful that we don't overload short-term memory and we allow students the opportunity to rehearse and revise information so that it's transferred successfully to their long-term memory. Cognitive load theory looks at three main types of cognitive load: intrinsic, extraneous and germane. And your role as a teacher is to help students to manage their cognitive load to achieve effective learning. So as we said before, making sure that their short-term memory isn't overloaded and overwhelmed. Intrinsic cognitive load refers to the relative difficulty or complexity of what you're asking your students to learn. Now, if you're introducing a new topic, a concept or an idea, then there'll always be a relatively high level of intrinsic cognitive load. Miller's Magic 7 tells us that the capacity of short-term memory is between 5 and 9 items, 7 plus or minus 2 for most people. But this can be extended by chunking information together. So we need to think very carefully about the amount of new information you'll be presenting in a lesson and try and limit it to between 5 and 9 new concepts. Any more and you'll be overloading the short-term memory of your students. Bailey and Hitch, in their working memory model, showed that the working memory has separate stores: the visual spatial sketchpad and the phonological loop. And their dual task experiment showed that information, if it's visual and auditory, it doesn't interfere with memory retention in the same way that 2 visual or 2 auditory tasks would. So in other words, we've probably got a capacity of 7 visual items and 7 auditory items. So a good way to present new information would be through a narrated diagram. And if a diagram is used, it's really good practice to embed any description rather than providing a key, as that adds to the cognitive load because you've got to keep flicking between one thing and another. Extraneous cognitive load is the things outside of the task or the information to be learned, and it's things that might prove to be a distraction. So sometimes the teacher can add to this extraneous cognitive load by giving information or instructions that are overly complicated and unnecessary. So when you're planning your lessons, have a check. Is everything you included really necessary? Is everything really clear? Are your instructions easy to follow? Doing that will reduce your students' extraneous cognitive load. A big issue when it comes to extraneous cognitive load can be low-level disruption in the classroom. So classroom management techniques will minimise this. A big problem for all teachers is mobile phones. Mobile phones can be very distracting, or iPads, to students. So always follow your school or college policy, but don't be afraid to get them to put them down, switch them off, put them away when you're introducing new information that's really important and you want them to give their full attention to you. The final type of cognitive load is the positive type. It's the one that we want. Germane cognitive load, and this is where the construction of schemata occurs and real deep learning is occurring. Now, just to recap, I'm sure you remember, but a schema is a cognitive representation of all we know about an object, person or idea. A really simple idea of a schema is a very young child might have a schema for a table, which is a flat rectangular surface to eat or work on with 4 legs. As the child becomes more experienced, they adapt that schema because they realise that tables come in all shapes and sizes, big ones, high ones, low ones, round ones, triangular ones, circular ones. They realise that some have 3 legs, others just have a central pedestal. A young child is constantly developing new schemata, but as we get older, we tend just to amend or adapt our existing schemata. Piaget says that what motivates us to learn is when our existing schemata no longer allows us to make sense of this world, of the world. And he said that this leads to the cognitive state of disequilibrium, the state of not knowing or being unsure. And he argues that we're motivated to discover what we need to know to achieve equilibrium in our cognitive states once more. If you've ever been in a situation where almost everyone knows a bit of gossip about one of your friends that you don't, you'll know how uncomfortable this disequilibrium is. You really want to find that information, and it'll really eat away at you until you do. And hopefully that's what we want to induce in our students, this disequilibrium, so they're really motivated to want to understand more, to learn. So learning takes place through 2 processes when we're talking about schemas: assimilation and accommodation. So assimilation is extending our schemas, adding new information to achieve equilibrium. So let's have a little example. So imagine a child who's got a pet Yorkshire Terrier. The parents tell the child that it's a dog. They know it's a doggy. Their Yorkshire Terrier's a doggy. Whilst out with parents, the child encounters a Great Dane, and obviously this animal looks nothing like their pet Yorkie. So the child is in a state of disequilibrium. They don't understand what it is. The child is then told by their parents that this is also a dog, as it has 4 legs and a tail. It's simply a bigger version. Therefore, the child's dog schema has now expanded to include dogs of varying sizes. Accommodation occurs when a child must either radically change their current schema or form a new one. For example, the same child in the previous example encounters a cat for the first time. They immediately think it's a dog, as it has 4 legs and a tail. The parent then has to explain that dogs bark and cats meow. The child now develops a cat schema. So just to sum up what we've learnt today about cognitive load theory, intrinsic cognitive load consider the complexity of the material you are presenting, and remember to limit it to between 5 and 9 new items of information per lesson. Extraneous cognitive load: control and eliminate any unnecessary distractions. And finally, germane cognitive load: consider whether the new information requires your students to assimilate knowledge into an existing schema, or requires, through the process of accommodation, to radically alter or build a new schema. You'll be then considering the germane cognitive load of your lesson. Thank you for listening. I do hope you found that useful.